for having me. My name is Brian Shepard, and I've been an organizer for 24 years, a professional organizer for 24 years. I've only been with the United Auto Workers the past year and a half. And to say that this past year and a half has been a whirlwind that's an understatement. So it's great to be here. It's great to see all of you. So again, like I said, the past year and a half at the UAW has been wild and an adventure. And as y'all have said, you've seen it from our stand-up strike to what we call internally Stand-Up 2.0, which is our push to unionize the entire auto industry. I'll talk a little bit about a picture about the situation that the leadership walked into so that you can understand some of the internal challenges we have. Just so everybody knows, I always teach our organizers not to give lectures. I teach people how to facilitate and have conversation. So I'll give you a little bit of background. When you just think about the auto industry in the United States, during the contract negotiations, General Motors, the number one domestic producer, just announced, again, record profits. While during negotiations, they were saying, we can't possibly afford this kind of contract. So we knew from the jump that that was just untrue. And so overall in the US auto industry, what we saw were automaker profits soaring. What we saw was auto workers were falling farther and farther behind in the economy. CEOs, the corporate executives, wages were higher than ever before. The cost of buying a vehicle was increasing so that many auto workers who were making the vehicles couldn't afford the vehicles they were making. The union is still facing very significant challenges. In 1970, the United Auto Workers had 1.5 million members. And at that time, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler had 84% of the overall market. Today, our membership is around 400,000, and the market share of those three companies is enormously decreased. So even if you go back just to the year 2000, nearly 4 out of 5 vehicles assembled in the United States were union made. But you fast forward to today, and now about half, just over half of the assembled vehicles in the United States are at non-union plants. So there's a lot of factors that we could talk about that contributed to that. Globalization, trade policy, federal laws around workers' rights. But what we can't ignore is that the United Auto Workers organizing program over the last 40 years just has not been a serious operation. And that contributed to that result. When we think about it, the Volkswagen plant in Tennessee that was organized earlier this year was the first auto assembly plant organized in an election since 1941, which is, every time I say it, it's hard to believe. And that has not only meant that there's more non-union auto workers in this country, but non-union and union workers suffered the neglect they suffered the consequences of that neglect. The leadership, when President Fain came in, if you think just 5 years ago, this union was written off as dead. Corruption rocked our leadership. Leadership went to jail. People were stealing money, and the members lost faith. The leadership, in addition to being corrupt, had let standards fall for decades. And again, new organizing in the auto industry had failed for generations. And then, something happened. Members decided to get back in the fight. They took a gamble on a little known leader named Shawn Fain. And what President Shawn Fain realized from the moment he got sworn in March of this year, or last year, March of last year, was that it was do or die for the United Auto Workers. That this union was either going to roll over and die, or the union was going to stand up. We learned from bargaining to new organizing that if you swing big, fight hard, members start to believe and workers start to believe in the union. But honestly, the UAW had lost the sense that we could win. And we know as organizers, for the organizers in the room, for the leaders in the room, we know that if workers don't believe that change is possible, then they are not going to stick their necks out there to fight for change. So we knew instantly, the leadership team and the staff, that we had to put a big win on the board. And that's why the contract campaign was our first organizing priority. Historically, new organizing was never involved in contract campaigns or contract fights. We had to show that it was possible for organizing to play a role in the mobilization of our membership. And we knew that within the first year, we had to win a non-union auto plant. And so Volkswagen made the most sense, and the workers there were able to do it. So that's just a little bit of context for the United Auto Workers and what the leadership was walking into. Yeah, the first step that we know in organizing is people have to have hope. If you do not have hope, you're not going to risk standing up and fighting. And so the one of the questions was about professional organizers. And what I'll say about that is there definitely has been a paid organizing staff. But again, that paid organizing staff had experienced failure for the past 40 years. So the union as an institution did not have systems or processes in place that you see in a winning organization. So not only did the members do what you just summarized so well, not only did the members lose the sense that they could win, the staff also had this attitude, which led to more failure. The staff didn't believe that workers could win. And so that's why we used organizers on the contract campaign and gave them a sense of what's possible. Almost all of the staff members on the organizing staff did not think of themselves as professional organizers. They viewed themselves as members who were helping out their union, but they did not have the discipline or the background or the training as a professional organizer. I mentioned at the beginning that January will make 24 years as a professional organizer. That has been my life's work, just helping workers form unions. The question I get asked a lot, and why we put organizers on the contract campaign, is what kind of impact did the big three strike have on organizing? And so let me start with the fact that when we went into a contract campaign, in other unions that I've worked for, you would plan a campaign like this for 150,000 workers years in advance. Years. At least a year, but mainly years. Now, President Fain was sworn in the last week of March. A new staff came on in the beginning of April. And so we had less than 6 months to teach the union how to run a contract campaign. That all parts of the union. We had to teach the staff, we had to teach the leadership, we had to teach the members, we had to teach the negotiators, everybody. And for what I understand, the union engaged historically in a practice called closed bargaining, where it's only the negotiation team who knows what's going on at the table. And then the leadership proposed something called open bargaining, where we announce our priorities in advance, we communicate with the membership about what's happening, and then you get the members involved at the local level. Because again, the GM, Ford, and Stellantis, you're talking multiple states, huge geography, dozens of plants all across the country. And so, again, in practice, you would want about a year to plan this, but that was just not an option. So our first move, assign organizers to work on it. We held meetings with local unions about priorities. So telling the members, and this was a very contentious thing, telling the members, we are going to fight to end wage tiers where new workers are paid less than existing workers. We are going to fight for a just transition into electric vehicles. So if they're going to replace internal combustion engines, we have to go after batteries and electric vehicles. That we were going to not have concessions. We were not moving backwards. We trained workers on how to talk with their coworkers. Surprising, not to people who have organizing experience, when we talked to our members about how to talk to their coworkers, they were very excited. They were so overjoyed and with disbelief that we were talking to them and sharing information with them. We were going to keep people updated on both the success and the setbacks. And then we started getting people ready to practice going on strike. And so the leadership knew, again, the only way people would fight is if they believed in something big. And so when we started the stand-up strike, we aimed for, as the workers voted to go on strike, just 14 rallies, 14 rallies and practice pickets. We thought if we could just wake up a small amount of local unions, it would be more than the union had done in years. So we put the call out, and in that 2-week period, we ended up with over 140 actions because people were like, I want to do that too. Why isn't our local picketing? Why isn't our local pushing? And that's what we called a movement moment, because we knew that if we unleashed the power of the membership, we could find a UAW that was just waiting for the fight. So in September, as we neared our deadline, we started getting dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of union interest cards from non-union plants. So workers at Toyota, workers at Hyundai, workers at Honda. That was with no staff, no outreach, no campaign. Non-union auto workers were streaming the Facebook events in their plants, so that when President Fain was talking to our members on Facebook, workers at Toyota, Volkswagen, Honda, and Mercedes were watching that too. And so we saw across the industry was employers racing to give workers raises to stop them from organizing a union. And the employers started running anti-union campaigns. And specifically, Hyundai was especially aggressive right away. Hyundai was one of the most aggressive to start holding meetings with workers, scaring them about the union, showing videos every week, every day in the daily meetings with their managers, talked about how the union was bad. So the contract campaign, this big public fight, it woke up the workers, but it also meant that the anti-union bosses woke up too. So that is kind of how the contract fight and being so public led to non-union workers by the thousands talking about how to organize a union. Yeah, so they are good people who were members, usually out of an auto plant, who came on staff to be professional organizers. But they were not skilled or trained as professional organizers. The union that I come from, the Service Employees International Union, which is the largest, most successful organizing union in the country, they specifically hire people who that is just what you do, right? You're not coming out of the plant. You're not a member of the organization. Your job is to just teach workers how to organize. And so part of that was we're still in the process of changing the internal culture. And giving people tools and skill. It's been said in organizing that organizing is both an art and a science, that there are strategies and tactics and tracking your supporters. That's the science side. But there's also the art side of it, is how do you persuade? How do you push people? How do you challenge people? How do you teach people how to engage with their coworkers? And that's more of the art side. What we had was a bunch of people who loved their union. And they're like, I love my union. I don't understand why you don't want to be in this union too. That's great. Your boss, threatens to fire you for talking about a union, or they hold meetings where they intimidate you and try to tell you all the bad things about the union. And so we're still in that process where we're trying to have people think of themselves as this is your profession. You're not on staff because you're a really good member. You're on staff because you can help people be successful. But again, 40 years of failure at the bargaining table, 40 years of failure at trying to organize new auto plants, that gets internalized. And you start to, if you get beat up all the time, just you lose faith that anything can be different. And so that's why I go into the question of stand up as a slogan. The quickest answer is that we chose that slogan as a recognition of the sit-down strikes of the 1930s that built the United Auto Workers. And the idea was that instead of just bargaining at one company, we would call on workers at all three companies to stand up. But the employers would never know which one was coming next. And this was a radical departure from the strategy of the past, where they would just pick one company like Chrysler or General Motors and go on strike. The union was built by workers sitting down on the job. And then we saw it as the union would be revitalized by workers standing up for themselves. And I think that has an impact on the whole organization. The membership, I think it has an impact on the staff. Think that has an impact on workers who are not yet in the union, is that you have to stand up for yourself. That was the thinking with our new organizing, was that workers couldn't wait on us, that they had to be willing to stand up because nobody was coming to save them. the way that the organizers talked about the union for a long time was much more of a service. Here is what we can do for you. Here is what we can offer you. Let us take care of this for you. Versus where we're headed, which is that a union is a democratic organization where workers get to make decisions. And the first decision you have to make is, are you going to stand up against your employer? So much different dynamic, right? Much different way to think about the work. That I'm not here to protect you. I'm not here to solve your problem. I'm here to help teach you how to fight your boss. It's much more aggressive. There was a question about organizing in the American South. And that is where almost all of these auto plants are located. And there's a reason why. So I'm going to do a little bit of a history lesson for those of you who don't know about the United States. You know, in the United States, we have a history of bigotry and violence around the color of your skin. And the center of that has always been the southern United States. I live in Texas, which was the last state to free the slaves. There was a war that ended, the Civil War ended in 1865, but even after slavery was legally abolished, so many of those people were condemned to poverty and discrimination in all areas of their lives. So if you were Black in the South in the early 1900s, you were shut out of higher skilled manufacturing jobs. You were forced into poverty conditions working in the farms, in agriculture. But in the 1930s, something happened in the labor movement, largely started by the UAW and the sit-down strikes, where we see workers organizing across race and across industry to start to make gains. So by the 1940s in the United States, the unions segregated by race, women aren't allowed in. You see the 1940s, that starts to change. And lower wage Black workers are starting to join unions for the first time. But the Southern economy was based on exploiting Black workers and scaring white workers into supporting laws that worked against their economic self-interest. So in the 1940s, the Southern states start passing anti-union laws that support the wealthy elite, but exploit workers and making it harder to organize in the South. So when places like Hyundai and Honda and Kia and Toyota and Mercedes are looking where to put their plants, they specifically chose the South because of favorable policies that were anti-worker. And you have politicians to this day saying the reason why you need to come and have your auto plant in our state is because we have a compliant workforce. Alabama, where 50,000 non-union auto workers are, again, that's where Mercedes, Toyota, Hyundai, Mazda all are. Alabama was the center of the American civil rights movement in the 1960s by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? So there's a reason Hyundai moved to Montgomery, Alabama, which was the home of the civil rights movement, but laws were so bad, the workforce is so exploited, so people can vote now, but they're taken advantage of by these corporations. So that's a big reason why past attempts at Volkswagen had such a hard time. You had a company that was not anti-union, Volkswagen, not anti-union globally, but you had a political establishment that saw it, that if one plant organized, the death to their economic model. And that's why when we were organizing Mercedes, what we saw was the governor of Alabama, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi. What do all those states have in common, right? They all signed a letter attacking the union, and these are all former slave states. So the major lesson we learned out of Volkswagen and Mercedes was that you've got to neutralize the employer, because that's a determining factor if we win or lose. And the second was, how are we building a deep leadership network that is going to stand up, because they're not just fighting their boss, they're fighting the whole political structure of that state, the whole business community of that state. Well, the budget is an ongoing conversation that our leadership is having. I actually think they're having a meeting tomorrow about that. I think that's a leadership decision they're still wrestling with. President Fain has said the two most important things we could be spending our budget on are winning good contracts for our members and organizing new workers into the union. That has not been the way budget resources have been allocated. And so that's in the process of changing. We have about 60 people on staff. We have about 60 to 65 maybe. Again, coming from the outside of the UAW, my former union has spent 20% of all of their budget on new organizing. And that took about 10 years to get them there, to go from spending 5% to 10% to 15 to 20. That took about a decade. But clearly not enough is spent on organizing. And I'm not just saying that as the organizing director, I'm saying as the labor movement. We spend definitely single digit percentage on organizing. And so we have to really change that. In our Constitution, there's a provision that in between conventions, which happen every 4 years, the union has a special fund of $60 million. That's supposed to be for special projects. So it wasn't 40 million new, it was just freeing up $40 million that was allocated to be spent on organizing. Right now, that's kind of the only organizing budget we have. So I think that's a discussion that the leadership is having right now. Yeah, it has to be, and that is really, the great thing about the United Auto Workers is that the leadership understands the importance of organizing, even if the union has not been very good at it historically. We have to organize the battery and electric vehicle sector. There's a lot of other unions that are trying to do that. How we view it is that if you're making a battery that the auto train that, or the powertrain that propels a vehicle forward, then the battery is essentially the engine of that vehicle. We did have a victory early last year with Ultium Cells. That was about 2,000 workers in Ohio. About a month ago, we organized another one of those as a result of the contract fight. That was 1,000 workers in Tennessee. And we're currently working on some campaigns right now in battery that hopefully we have another big victory by the end of the year. We've got to organize the electric vehicle sector. And, eventually that means we have to organize Tesla because they're the leader in that space. That means we're going to have to face not only the richest man in the world, but arguably one of the most insane people, I think, right now in terms of American politics. Very anti-union and very narcissistic and a kind of, maniac. I think that's being nice by saying that. That's a nice way to say it. Yeah, so social media is important to communicate with people on a big scale. The way we think about and talk about the union is there's really three parts. Um, it's about power, the workers being able um, to not just be uh, that they have the ability to have a say in their work life. It's about democracy in the workplace, that workers are the ones who decide who represents them, what contract proposals get put out there, um, and that it's part of a movement. And the movement is 150,000 auto workers were able to stand up and win by going on strike. Volkswagen workers, other battery workers are joining that movement, and you should too. So we think about the social media component of that really to help amplify that third part, that it's part of a movement, because it's not necessarily social media isn't an effective way to organize workers, but it is a tool to build a list. It's a tool to communicate information. And I think, when bad information gets out there, it's a way to correct that. I think the UAW and auto workers in this country have lost the common sense, like in the 30s and 40s, that joining the UAW was just what auto workers do. And so, we need to, so I think social media plays a role in reestablishing that the thing that auto workers do is join a union. So whether you're in Michigan or Mississippi, you sign a union card, you fight to join a union, and you don't get left behind. So I think social media is enormously effective at that. Social media has played a very important role in terms of that last way we think about the union is like joining and be a part of a movement. We've again, I've talked about this, the culture change. The union really did lack systems and structures, and so coming off a Volkswagen win and a loss at Mercedes, we spent a lot of time analyzing what worked and what didn't, and we came up with different categories, like what helps a winning campaign. Number one, and most important is like building a public organizing committee. So workers who are not afraid to say they're supporting the union, to do social media posts, to be on leaflets. Two is we obviously need a majority public support. With the labor laws in this country, there's a archaic process that has been around since the 30s and 40s, where you need a majority public support all throughout the process. Strategic communications, part of that is social media, part of that is like worker to worker communications, more like what we would think of as grassroots communication. Like in Volkswagen, suppressing the boss fight is the number one determining factor. And then again, for the staff, our staff, rather than just like, oh, I was a member at General Motors and it was great, you should get it too. That was kind of how they talked about the union, is we've been retraining people that, no, your job is to identify, recruit, and develop leaders. There has not been a lot of successful tradition. And so like that's what we're trying to develop, these systems to help organizers develop a common culture and the best practices. I mean, I don't have them. I can pull them together, but yes, we would love to share this stuff. There's the modules, but what our team is learning is the really hard lesson that it's not just the modules or the knowledge, it's going through the process. And so, training people who are good at facilitating is really essential. because it's not just about, oh, here's information on how to talk to people. You have to really kind of struggle through it together. You have to wrestle with ideas. You have to have debate and argument, because what we're talking about is the classroom is a very important part. But where organizers learn is through doing, and then examination and reflection and discussion. That is one of the biggest mistakes the organization made historically, is they would lose a campaign, let's say Nissan in Mississippi in 20, and the organizer would say, well, the boss just fought us, or the boss threatened to take away the lease program. Okay, but you were there for 10 years. 10 years. You didn't think to prepare people for that. So there was no critical thinking, no self-examination, no lessons learned. It was just, oh, the boss always wins. And so a big part of how organizers learn is you have to make mistakes, and then you have to talk about those mistakes, and you got to learn from those mistakes. And I think part of the UAW culture was you're not allowed to admit mistakes, because if you admit mistakes, you're going to get in trouble. But then the result is everybody fails. And I'm being very honest. And the reason I can be honest is because I know that our president is very honest about this. And like, there was no self-examination. And if you don't have that, you can't get better. You're never going to win, because the boss is always going to fight. Of course it's going to be difficult. Yeah, for our like parts for the auto companies, the challenge with that is, again, geography. The United States is a big country. They're all over the country. And then these smaller auto supply companies, they will just pack up and leave. Not even the United States. They'll just go from one state to another. And because they only employ, 150, 200 people, maybe 500 at their largest, it's easier for them to just shut down operation. So unless you have a strategy to organize them all at once, it's like you could have a bunch of victories, but it goes nowhere, right? So that's why you got to get to the source, which is the auto assembly. Because if you can get the source, then you can expand out to the part suppliers and use the relationship you have with a Volkswagen or a Mercedes or a Hyundai to push the suppliers into the union too. But I think the strategy, maybe because it was easier, that the UAW has used before is like they could get some wins at these small companies, but it never equated to power. It never equated to changing the industry. And so I always say, like, what's the point? Why would we do that? If you're not changing people's lives through being in the union, it doesn't help them have more power to negotiate a better life. Just getting members is not the right thing to do. This is really interesting because I just met with the Mercedes workers in Alabama on Sunday. And that was one of the big issues that came up, is a lot of these plants, when they opened 20 years ago, were majority white. And then as the jobs have fallen farther and farther behind, there are more people of color. One of the issues that people brought up was a tension there between the white workers and the black workers. The only way to deal with racism is you've got to take it head on, and you've got to talk about it. And I think the union is the one powerful place in the United States. People live and like go to church and congregate with people who look like them, who are in the same socioeconomic class as them. I think that's why the union is so powerful, because you can bring people together across ethnicity and class and background and help them see that you're all sharing the same challenges. I say, think a way to do that is you have to hire organizers who look just like the people you're organizing. If you're a very skilled organizer, you can break through that for the most part to some degree. But most people are not. And so it does help to have people who look like the people they're organizing and have a good mix of that. I wish I had some special skills or training on that. I mean, I worked very closely on Mercedes, and there was a young man about 20 years old, and I remember the first time he came to a meeting. He was a white guy who was from the country, and the country tends to be more politically conservative. And he had a shirt on that said, "Shoot your local terrorists." So his politics were very clear. Through the union campaign, this young man became best friends with Black workers and Latino workers and women workers. And by the end of the campaign, he was like, I don't understand why the UAW is taking a position on Gaza. And by the end of the campaign, he said, I read up on it and I realized, like, oh, these people are getting taken advantage of, and like they're the ones that are getting oppressed. So I changed my opinion. The union is the only place we can do that, I think. I think our local churches should do that. I don't think they're very effective at it in the United States. I think there's no other place where people are going to get that kind of interaction. Maybe the military breaks down some of those barriers, but I think the union has the power to really transform that and for us to see one another as people. Number one, you got to keep them in big fights. I think that is really important. Keeping people in big fights so that they're remembering who the real enemy is, which is the boss. I remember during the contract campaign, Bill Ford, of the Ford family, said to the press, the media, it should be Ford and the UAW versus Toyota and Hyundai. And Sean Fain said, no, it's auto workers everywhere versus corporate greed. So I think you've got to have those big fights. I think there's probably some tension around that, resources going to new workers. I think if you have those conversations with people, auto workers understand that when there was only 3 car companies in this country, the UAW set the standards. I think people, even if they don't like it, understand that if by our next contract cycle, we don't bring a Hyundai or a Toyota or a Honda to the table, we're not going to be able to get record contracts again. Because right now we have about 46% of the market. We bring Toyota to the table, now we're closing on 60% of the market. Now you can really change things. You throw Hyundai in there, and now you're at 70+% of the market. So you can really set wages for every American auto worker if you do that. So I think people understand that. I think we can't be afraid to have those conversations with our members. We have to, right? A worker in the South asked me, what does the UAW get out of organizing us? You just want our dues money. You just want us to be a part of your union. The union has shrunk over the years. And he said, I know why my boss doesn't want a union, because then they're going to have to give us more wages and benefits and, better work days. But he's like, but I want to know why the UAW wants us. What's your selfish reason? Yeah, we have a selfish reason. You guys are bringing us down. The more non-union workers there are in this country, the less our members can negotiate at the table. And if you're a part of negotiating at the table, not only will our members benefit, but you will benefit too. Every auto worker. So if that's selfish, then yes, that's selfish. That's the truth. So yeah, I think we have to take this on. People have to understand, we're not organizing to take resources away. Our power, our ability to win depends on what percentage of industry we represent. Right now, approvals of unions in America is over 70%. But that's in the abstract, because that's not without an employer opposition. But what that tells us is workers really want a union. People are very supportive of unions, but we got to figure out how to build strong worker committees that can withstand a boss fight, or ways to limit employer opposition. I've spent 2 decades in the labor movement. The UAW was thought of kind of as a dinosaur in the rest of the labor movement, honestly. And I think this past year and a half, by again taking on big fights, by calling out corporate greed, really spoke to a lot of people. I think that with COVID, the pandemic, changes in the market, workers feel really uncertain. And that provides us an opportunity to help people understand that without a union contract, your employer gets to decide everything from your wages to your schedule to whether you could sit down on a break or not. And I think we got to keep pushing on that, because in the American legal system and political system, we definitely have champions in our government, but we can't wait around for them. I think the lesson we learned is you have to create a crisis. You have to go out, again, you keep hearing me, you got to create big fights. You've got to create a crisis so that then elected officials have to propose solutions to that, versus just trying to look for legislative solutions. Create a crisis, make it their problem. Then it's Joe Biden's problem if you got 150,000 auto workers on strike. He has motivation to solve that, or whoever it is, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, whoever it is, right? You create the crisis that makes them have to solve it. So that's what I've learned. That's what I think we're learning is people get inspired when you challenge authority. Now, I'm a rebel, so that always has, since a little child, has excited me. But yeah, that's I think a major lesson.
So are there also cases when local communities or NGOs or other groups come together, like communities come together with trade unions and contribute to this kind of union renewal?
I think other organizations are looking for ways to do that. I think, and this isn't just the UAW, this is speaking of my experience in the labor movement. I think that happens very sporadically and very pieced together. I know as we're thinking about work in Alabama and Mississippi and other places, we're trying to be more intentional about that, to build relationships with people at the beginning of a fight instead of the end of a fight. So I think that we have to improve that. Yes, we're in conversation about that. If Vice President Harris wins, that'll be one set of demands. If former President Trump wins, we could be facing extinction because he will go after unions in general. But former President Trump has gone out of his way to attack UAW President Sean Fain and auto workers. So we'll see. We're in conversations about what both those scenarios mean. I think the ability to identify, recruit, and develop worker leaders is just such an essential skill that all organizers need, because we are never going to have enough staff or enough money and resources as the opposition. So I think that's an essential skill. I think an ability to write plans in pencil and not pen. So being flexible enough to try new things, evaluate what is working and what is not, and not be afraid to make mistakes. And then I think we can't think small. Again, you keep hearing me say this, we have to think big. We're not going to save the labor movement anywhere. Again, there is value to like smaller scale organizing, but we have to think big and try to think about how the work we're doing creates lasting structural change. I think sometimes we get caught up in let's just keep some small wins coming in. I think we have to think big. We have to really have imagination about what kind of world we want to leave our children and their children. So I think we have to think about that, the legacy. Well, just as we've been in this meeting, 89 parts workers about 4-hour drive north of me just won their union in the face of union opposition. And they supply parts to the General Motors plant in Dallas. So these tactics work in small and large facilities. But your General Motors workers during their negotiations understood the importance of the electric vehicle transition. So part of what they negotiated in their contract fight was that if workers chose to form a union, that they would be part of that national agreement. So that's the 1,000 workers at a battery plant. Ultium Cells, LG and GM set up, but it was non-union. So 1,000 workers chose to form a union. Now they will be in the same contract with the General Motors workers overall, which is a huge victory. So how do you use negotiations of your existing members to force the company to at least either stay out of the way or like guarantee some victory once workers form a union? So that's an example of it. Right now, workers at Ford, their EV is called Blue Oval, their big project. So Ford has a joint venture with SK. Those workers are now organizing. Again, we imagine that Ford and SK will fight us, but the fight will be significantly less than what we saw at Mercedes. And part of that is leveraging your existing relationships with the company to at least try to slow them down. Again, at Mercedes, we saw, nonstop intimidation, daily meetings, daily videos, text messages, politicians talking to the workers. Americans love American football, especially in the South, college football. They had Nick Saban, who was the coach of the University of Alabama football team, come in and talk to them, which is by far the most powerful person in Alabama, is the head football coach. So when we have relationships with employers, we can help lean on them so that they don't fight quite that bad. In GM's case, in General Motors, it was negotiated through the contract. That was a part of it. We're still going to test out with smaller suppliers as we put together a program. We're going to test out, can we get them to lean on these companies? So, just highlighting that workers at the plant they're supplying to have a union, even something as simple as that can make somewhat of a difference. An overwhelming majority sign union cards to be members. So they're at a super majority support. Yeah, culture. I would say that is a work in progress. Yes. Number one, I am not from the United Auto Workers. So putting somebody who is not from the organization in charge of organizing was very contentious. There's a lot of tension around that. Still is some tension, Christine, I think, if I'm being fair. Yes, we brought in a couple people from outside of the organization to be managers. Yes, we had to change some of the leadership within the organizing department, partially because most of the people who were in leadership positions in the union in organizing, they had not been successful. So if you've never done something, it is really hard, possible, but it's very difficult to challenge and train people to be successful. And I think that's in any type of work. I can't ask people to do what I can't do as a leader. And so, yes, we had to have some changes within the department. Well, first of all, Mercedes was 5.5 months for a unit of 5,100 workers. Yeah, I think capacity was a real problem. We were running multiple campaigns. On that unit of 5,100, it was myself and 2 organizers. That's it, 2. So for most of the campaign, at the point at which we were going to election, I went on to work on some other things and delegated responsibility to people. There was definitely some mistakes that we made internally, but it's worth noting that those workers at Mercedes have never even gotten to that point over the past 20 years of starting and stopping and trying. So the fact that they were able to withstand a major employer boss fight and still get 44% of the unit to support it is pretty remarkable. But there was definitely some decisions that were made at the end that I think might have had a different result. I think the most notable was in communication. We were very aggressive at attacking the boss all throughout the campaign. And the last month or so, we let up on that. And so it went from us attacking the boss and the boss responding to the workers to then the boss attacking the union and the union really just focused on the election. And I think that was a strategic error. We get this both internally from our membership and definitely to the workers I talk to in the South, which are more politically conservative. Our union just released a poll today that workers in what we call battleground states in the United States, like where it goes back and forth between party, that's Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Sorry, that's so fast. That Kamala Harris leads Donald Trump by 22 percentage points among our members. So the problem with Trump supporters is they're just very loud. They're the minority, but they're very loud and aggressive. And so it creates the perception that auto workers support Trump. And again, auto workers, even in non-union facilities, I have not met an auto worker that supports Donald Trump because they think it will improve their job or their economic position. They support Trump for a multitude of other reasons. Guns, abortion, immigration, tough talk on China. They support him for all those reasons. No auto worker, non-union auto worker that I've talked to can honestly look me in the eyes and say, I support Donald Trump because it's good for auto workers. And the way that I've talked to workers who've been aggressive about that is to say, I can understand you don't like Kamala Harris. So I acknowledge their frustration. But the United Auto Workers advocates for auto workers. One candidate, when he was the candidate, Joe Biden, walked a picket line with workers during this recent strike. Kamala Harris walked a picket line in 2019 with workers. The other candidate told people to drop out of the union. Most recent strike. When he was president, did nothing to help the auto workers strike in 2019. Did nothing when plants closed in the Midwest or in the United States. So if you're a union of auto workers, who would you support? Person in the right, what would you want to belong to a union that would support a candidate that thinks that the union should be weaker, that they shouldn't go on strike, and they shouldn't fight for better wages, or laughs about people getting fired for going on strike? And most people respect that honesty, right? So they might disagree with you, but they respect that honesty. Because no union in good conscience could support Donald Trump with the track records he's had on workers' rights. And again, people like to say the union shouldn't be involved in politics, which I know many of us would gladly agree to. Hyundai stayed out of politics. If Toyota stayed out of politics, if GM stays out of politics, but they don't. They're going to advocate for their economic interests. We have to advocate for auto workers' interests. It's as simple as that. Did that answer your three? Those are three very, very good questions. That would be an honor to do that and to bring some of our organizers to that as well. And one of my assistant directors is Korean. Though he was born in Korea, grew up in the United States, I know he would be excited to be a part of that too. I think our members really understand the importance of, there's a lot of excitement in the union when the Volkswagen workers won, and a lot of heartbreak when the Mercedes workers lost. I think our union understands, again, that we have to get back to a majority of auto workers in order to improve their lives. The United Auto Workers is the largest union of academic workers in the country, representing workers at the University of California, University of Washington, University of Oregon, Harvard, Columbia, all these prestigious Princeton, all these prestigious institutions. Definitely there's a difference of age, politics, gender, ethnicity that comes with that. I think it makes us a stronger union because similar to workers who work at a Toyota or workers that work at a Ford, you have these global institutions like a Harvard where academic workers, though they're not exploited for their physical labor, they definitely are exploited for their mental labor. I recently was talking to some workers who just organized at the National Institute of Health, which is outside of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and to hear how these young people who are brilliant are working for such low wages and having to live in houses with multiple people just to survive, while they're making medicine that will then go on to get sold by big pharmaceutical companies for billions and billions of dollars, is just outrageous. And so I think we try to focus on the commonality that working people are taken advantage of by institutions. And, that brings a different, different life into the union. So there definitely is tension, but I think that tension is healthy. I think you want organizations to have differences of opinion. I remember I started organizing when I was 23, so I'm used to being the young one. As you can see, and it's from all the stress, I'm getting more and more gray. I think the youngest organizer we have on staff is 24. I think that's the old, and we do have some organizers in their like mid to late 20s. The best training program for them is a mix, as we talked about before, of best practices and classroom training, and then mentorship by more veteran organizers who have experience. Again, the problem we have is we've been able to bring in some people from outside who have success and have that experience, and that's what we're trying to like develop the next generation of organizers. I mean, I've said repeatedly, I was happy doing the job I was doing before, but being the organizing director of the UAW is the most important job in the entire labor movement in the United States. I don't want to do this forever. Maybe get us through the strike of 2028. But I definitely spent a lot of time thinking about how are we developing the next generation that's going to be able to take on these fights. And I'm only 48, so I'm not that old. I'm old, but I'm not that. I just look a lot older. That's from a life on the road. We've been working on connecting workers from like BMW and Mercedes and Hyundai together, and that's a way we're doing like training of workers. That's on Zoom because again, big geography, different shifts. But yeah, that's one way we use technology to connect people to share their common experience. Volkswagen had 10 years of failure. That meant there was at least a list of the workers, and then some workers who had been there all 10 of those years, who had tried and failed on previous attempts. I think that the challenge was, how do you recruit more people so that every part of the plant is represented? And so there was a systematic recruitment of people who were pro-union, and then training them on how to talk about the union to their coworkers. So that really started right after the strike at Volkswagen in October, November. And then from there, it just kind of accelerated. We did have the momentum coming out of the big three negotiation. And then, what the organizers did was continue to identify people in every shift, every work area, every department, make sure we had them, at least had one person in each of those areas that could communicate information with their coworkers. But I gotta say, the work that Christine and our other parts of our team did, working with the German Works Council to neutralize the employer, was by far the number one factor in winning. You can't win without the workers. You can't win without workers sticking up for and being public about their union support. But I think that would have crumbled, honestly, if we did not neutralize the boss to some degree in Volkswagen. Christine, I think that's fair to say. I think you guys did tremendous work on that front.
It certainly made a difference that
Mhm.
the Works Council negotiated a deal
Mhm.
with management not to let
Mhm.
outside parties
Mhm.
come in,
Mhm.
whereas
Mhm.
Mercedes gave
Mhm.
opened the gates and let
Yes.
third parties in 24/7
Mhm.
on the
Mhm.
floor
Yeah.
and abused the workers 24
Yeah.
hours a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, the biggest lesson there is a well-organized workforce can withstand the boss fighting, but when you combine the boss with the political establishment, with the outside influencers, it is tremendously difficult to win.